What really happened to the real Jim Carrey? What if the man you grew up laughing at stopped laughing? What if the loudest voice in Hollywood went completely silent? And what if, according to millions of people on the internet, that's not even the same man at all? The king of comedy. Before we go down this rabbit hole, let's remember who we're talking about. Jim Carrey. Born in Newmarket, Ontario, Canada, January 17, 1962. He didn't come from money. He didn't come from connections. His family was so broke they once lived out of a van, a literal van, parked in a field. But even back then, he had something electric. He moved to Los Angeles with nothing but a belief so strong it bordered on delusion. He wrote himself a check for $10 million for acting services rendered. He kept it in his wallet. He carried it everywhere. And then, Hollywood came calling. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, all released in the same year. Nobody had even come close. He became the first actor in history to command a $20 million paycheck, and he earned it. Every single cent. Through the late 90s and into the 2000s, he was untouchable. Liar, Liar, The Truman Show, Man on the Moon, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Die Just Mind. He wasn't just funny, he was fearless, and audiences around the world fell in love with him. So what happened? Where did he go? And why does it feel like the man we see today is someone else entirely? The turning point when something changed. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when the shift began. These things rarely happen overnight, but look closely enough and you start to see the cracks appear. In 2008, Carrey began a very public relationship with actress Jenny McCarthy. They seemed electric together, but behind the scenes, the industry was changing. His box office numbers were no longer guaranteed. Some films flopped. Critics began whispering. Then in 2010, he and Jenny split. 2 years later, one of his close friends, comedian and writer Mark Helfrich, described watching Carrey go through what he called a genuine spiritual earthquake. Not a breakdown, not a crisis, but a fundamental rewriting of who he believed himself to be. That quote came from a 2017 interview at New York Fashion Week. Jim Carrey walked the red carpet, which by itself was unusual. But then he stopped, and he said something that stopped the interviewer cold. He said, "There's no me. There's just things happening." He gestured at the crowd, the cameras, the spectacle around him. And here's the good news. There is no me. People watching at home had two very different reactions. Some said, "That's a man who's found peace. That's enlightenment." Others said something is very, very wrong. And then there were the interviews on the Canadian talk show E-Talk, the appearances where he'd give one-word answers, stare blankly, dismiss questions about his career as if they were beneath him. The Jim Carrey who once would have turned every press junket into a comedy special was gone. His eyes were the same color, his voice was the same voice, but something behind them had changed, and the internet noticed. The internet theories. The clone conspiracy. Welcome to the part of the internet where nothing is what it seems. Because sometime around 2015, a theory began to spread. Not in newspapers, not on television, in forums, in comment sections, in the kind of dark corners of the internet where people go when official explanations just don't feel like enough. The theory? Simple, disturbing, and wildly popular. Jim Carrey, the real Jim Carrey, had been replaced. Proponents pointed to photographs, side-by-side comparisons that they claimed showed subtle differences in ear shape, jawline structure, the exact distance between the eyes. They pointed to behavioral shifts so dramatic, they said no amount of personal growth could account for it. They pointed to other celebrities who had appeared to change. Britney Spears, Kanye West, Dave Chappelle. Each one had, at some point, behaved in ways the public found jarring. Each one had their own clone theory. But Jim Carrey's was particularly persistent, particularly detailed. One widely shared Reddit thread broke down every major interview from 2010 onwards, cataloging what the user called deprogramming anomalies, moments where Carrey seemed to forget a prepared answer or speak as if reading from a script he didn't fully understand. "They got to him," one commenter wrote. "Whoever he was before, that man is gone." Others tied it to broader Hollywood narratives. The idea that the entertainment industry exerts a form of psychological control over its biggest stars. That extreme fame is itself a kind of mind alteration. that the pressure to perform at that level for that long, for that many people, fundamentally changes you. Some took it further still, tying it to monarch mind control theories, to claims about elite Hollywood circles, to symbols supposedly hidden in his films. Now, and this is important, there is zero credible evidence for any of this. No scientist has verified a clone, no whistleblower has come forward, no document has emerged. But here's the uncomfortable thing about conspiracy theories. Sometimes they're pointing at something real, just not what they think it is. The reality, what actually happened. So let's talk about what we actually know. Because the real story of Jim Carrey's transformation is, if anything, more fascinating than any conspiracy theory. In 2016, his girlfriend Catriona White died by suicide. She was 30 years old. The grief that followed was, by all accounts, devastating. Carrey had already been exploring questions of identity and consciousness for years, influenced by Eckhart Tolle, by Buddhist philosophy, by conversations with people far outside the Hollywood bubble. But loss has a way of accelerating everything. In his authorized documentary, Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond, released in 2017, we got a window into something extraordinary. It documented the filming of Man on the Moon back in 1999, where Carrey played the legendary comedian Andy Kaufman. And what it revealed was shocking. Carrey didn't just play Kaufman, he became him. For the entire production, he refused to break character, not on set, not off set, not in meetings, not during emergencies. He terrorized crew members, he upset co-stars, he was, by his own admission, possessed. Jim Carrey didn't exist at that time, he said on camera. Andy took over. He described the experience as proof that identity itself, the self we believe we are, is a story we tell ourselves, a costume. And once you've seen beneath the costume once, you can never fully put it back on. At Maharishi University's 2014 commencement address, he said something that has since been viewed tens of millions of times. I learned that the effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is. Everything you gain in life will rot and fall apart, and all that will be left of you is what was in your heart. This is not the language of a broken man or a replaced one. This is the language of someone who went all the way to the edge of who they were and decided not to come back. He picked up painting. He became genuinely a serious visual artist, not a celebrity dabbling, but someone spending 6, 8, 12 hours a day in front of a canvas. He used art as activism, creating sharp political cartoons that divided audiences but demonstrated unmistakable skill. He retreated from Hollywood, not because Hollywood discarded him, but because he chose something quieter. He began speaking openly about depression, about the pharmaceutical industry, about the absurdity of fame. He did it without apology and without performance. For those who loved the rubber-faced tornado from the 90s, that man was gone. But for those paying attention to something deeper, a man was finally, fully arriving. Cultural commentary, why we need the theory. Here's what the clone theory actually tells us. Not about Jim Carrey, about us. We live in a culture that consumes celebrities like products. We buy them at their peak, funny, marketable, reliable. We expect them to remain on the shelf, unchanged, available whenever we need a laugh or a distraction. When they change, when they grow, or grieve, or question, or evolve, we don't always have a framework for that. It's easier to say that's not the real Jim Carrey than to accept that the real Jim Carrey was always more complicated than what he showed us. The conspiracy isn't about clones, it's about our fear of people changing. The internet conspiracy machine is at its core a machine for processing discomfort. Something feels wrong. Something has changed. We reach for a narrative that makes it make sense, but sometimes the most honest explanation is also the hardest one to accept. People change, fame wounds, grief transforms, and underneath all that rubber-faced brilliance was a man asking the same questions we all eventually have to ask. Who am I when nobody's watching? What do you believe? Jim Carrey is still alive. He still paints. He still speaks occasionally in the kind of interviews that leave journalists unsettled. He has not vanished. He has not been replaced. But something did die. The version of him we needed. The one who performed so we didn't have to feel anything too deeply. That version made a choice. Somewhere between the rubber masks and the philosophical red carpets and the grief and the paint-stained studio in Malibu, he let that version go. So maybe the conspiracy theorists aren't entirely wrong. Maybe the Jim Carrey we knew, the one who made us howl in movie theaters in 1994, the one who made the whole world feel like one enormous punchline. Maybe that man doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. Maybe what we loved was always a mask. And the real mystery is why it took us so long to wonder